Okay, so the last two problems from this practice were you were given a rule or you're given an equation and you need to fill out the table first and then we need to graph it. So looking at the first one, y equals negative x minus 2. Now be careful here with this negative x part. That's like saying what's the opposite of x. So over on the right here, I'm going to just do some work here. So that would be like saying y equals negative, and then x is negative 3. And then, I think it was minus 2. Alright, so y equals negative of negative 3 minus 2. Well, think of this right here as being like the opposite of negative 3. Well, that's just positive 3. And then positive 3 minus 3 is 0. So in this case, the y value is going to be 0. And then for the next one, it would be y equals negative, and then x is negative 2 minus 2. Well, the opposite of negative 2 is positive 2, and 2 minus 2 is 0. And I just realized that I messed up the first time. Did you catch that? So if you look up above there, sorry about that. If you look up above, I wrote minus 3, but the equation is supposed to be minus 2. So if I switch that, that should be 3 minus 2, which is a 1. So I apologize for that. So let's just take care of that there. So when x is negative 3, the y value is 1. And when x is negative 2, the y value is 0. Okay. When x is negative 1, it's going to be the opposite of negative 1 minus 2. So 1 minus 2 is negative 1. So when y is negative 1, when x is negative 1, the y is also negative 1. Alright, so now the opposite of 0 is just 0. There is no opposite of 0 really. So that's going to be just 0 minus 2, and that's negative 2. So when x is 0, the y is negative 2. I'm going to erase a bunch of this stuff here so that I have more room to write. And then I'm just going to move on. The next ones, you're going to have to start being careful with your negative signs here. Okay, so when y is 1, it's going to be the opposite of 1 minus 2. So negative 1 minus 2 is negative 3. So that would be a negative 3. Y equals the opposite of 2 minus 2. So negative 2 minus 2 is negative 4. So y would be negative 4. And then last, y equals the opposite of 3 minus 2. So negative 3 minus 2 is negative 5. Now, I need to graph them. Okay, so here's the thing about graphing these. It's kind of hard on this graph paper, and I can't use a ruler on the iPad, so I'm going to try as best I can. The first thing I need to do is make a set of axes. Now, I need some negatives on the x's. I need some negatives on the y's. I only need to go down to negative 5, so let's just do this. Okay. I need to scale 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Here's 10. That lets my teacher know that I went by ones, but I don't have to write every single thing. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's negative 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Negative 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's negative 5. Okay, so there's my scale. My y-axis is up and down. My x-axis is left and right. Don't forget those things because you need a complete graph. And now I'm going to go back to red and I'm going to plot those points. So negative 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 1 would be about right there. Negative 2, 0 would be there. Negative 1, 0, negative 2, 1, negative 3. And you see the pattern here. It's going to be a line. 2 is negative 4. Okay. And again, I don't have a ruler, so I'm going to try to make a straight line as best as I can. Whoa, kind of. yours should look better than mine. Now that was the equation y equals negative x minus 2. So make sure you label your equation. I know it's right because there was no x squares, and I know that it's going to be a line. All right, let me erase this work over here on the right, and then let me do my next equations. Okay, so for the next equation, it's y equals x squared plus 1. Now when I think about that for a second, x squared is always going to be a U-shaped or a parabola. So I know when I'm done, I'm going to have a parabola when I'm done graphing. And the other thing you have to remember is whenever you're squaring it, you have to put your negative numbers in parentheses before you square it, or just do it in your head. So for the first one, it's going to be y equals negative 3 in parentheses, then square it, and then add 1. Well, negative 3 times negative 3 is 9, so that's a positive 9 plus 1, so y equals 10. So my first point, when x is negative 3, my y value is, oops, I just moved it. Well, that stinks. Okay, my y value is going to be 10. All right, and then I'm going to do y equals negative 2 squared plus 1. Well, that's negative 2 times negative 2, so that's positive 4 plus 1, so that equals 5. So the second point is going to be 5. And then I have y equals negative 1 squared plus 1. Well, negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1, plus 1 is 2. So when x is negative 1, the y value is 2. Let me erase some of my work. And when I plug in 0, I can just do that one probably in my head here. 0 squared is just 0, and 0 plus 1 is 1. And then y equals 1 squared plus 1, so that's just going to be 1 plus 1 is 2. Okay, when x is 2, that's going to be 2 times 2 plus 1, so that's 4 plus 1, which is 5. And you notice that the numbers, the y values start to repeat, and that's good. Alright, so then I've got 3 squared plus 1. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10. Now I need to graph those. And remember, I know that they should be a parabola, so let's see if I can graph it. Negative 3, and up to 10 is about right there. Negative 2, 5, negative 1, 2, 0, 1. And then 1, 2, 2, 5, and 3, 10. And they should start to repeat themselves. So if you look over here, went up like that. So there's my parabola. If you get something that looks like an S, you know you did something wrong, and you might want to redo it. Okay? Alright, so there's my graphs. I do have a complete graph because I've got the scale, I've got my X and Y axis labeled, I have arrows on my graph, I extended it, I didn't use a ruler, but you should use a ruler, and I wrote the equations next to the lines. Now the next two questions say, explain one way the two equations graphed are different. Well, the first one is a line, and the other one is a parabola, and the other is a parabola. It didn't show up very well. One way that they're similar, well, they both make patterns. So there's a pattern in my graph, so I can kind of tell if something's wrong. There's no bent shapes anywhere. Yeah, they both have lines. I extend both of them. There's a bunch of ways that I could say that they're both similar. Okay, so I went through this really long way. Maybe you don't need to take as much time, but please be careful when it's x squared and you put in a negative number, and also be careful when it's a negative x. That's like saying the opposite of x. All right, you can rewind this if you need to.